Imagine a small group of riders on the dusty plains of Anatolia. They have no palace and no crown. They have only their horses and a fierce sense of purpose. Within a few generations, these nomads would rule the crossroads of the world. This is the story of how a tiny spark became a global fire. This is the rise of the Ottoman Empire. In the late 13th century, the map of the Middle East was a fractured mosaic. The great Seljuk Turk Empire had crumbled under Mongol pressure. Small independent states called beyliks emerged from the ruins. One of these was led by a man named Osman. His territory was humble, sitting on the very edge of the fading Byzantine Empire. Osman was a Ghazi, a term you should note. In this historical context, a Ghazi is a warrior motivated by faith and the desire to expand the frontiers of his people. Listen to that word, frontier. It refers to the extreme limit of settled land. Osman lived on the frontier, where the air was thick with the smell of pine and the sound of sharpening steel. A famous legend tells of Osman's dream. One night, while staying at the house of a holy man, he saw a moon rising from the chest of his host and entering his own. Then a great tree grew from his navel. Its branches covered the whole world. Its leaves were like scimitars, pointing toward the great city of Constantinople. Historians debate whether this dream actually happened or was written later to justify his rule. Regardless, it captures a powerful truth. Osman believed his line was destined for greatness. This belief is what we call a sense of destiny. When someone has a sense of destiny, they act with a terrifying kind of certainty. Notice how the word ascendance describes this period. In English, ascendance means a position of dominant power or influence. Osman's small tribe began its ascendance by absorbing other groups. They were not just warriors, they were masters of inclusion. They welcomed anyone who was willing to fight and build. Look closely at their location. They were situated in Sot, in northwestern Anatolia. This gave them a unique advantage. While other Turkish tribes fought each other in the interior, Osman's people were facing the Greeks. They were at the gates of the West. This proximity to Europe would define their entire future. In these early years, the Ottomans were a nomadic society. Nomadic means living the life of a nomad, moving from place to place rather than living in one settlement. But they were changing. They were learning how to besiege cities. To besiege a city means to surround it with armed forces, to force it to surrender. Their first major victory was the city of Bursa in 1326. Osman did not live to see the gates open, but his son Orhan did. Bursa became the first true Ottoman capital. It was no longer a camp of tents. It was a center of stone and commerce. The transition from tribe to state had begun. Notice the word vassal. As the Ottomans grew, they didn't always destroy their enemies. Often, they made them vassals. A vassal is a person or a state that holds land or power on the condition of loyalty to a superior. This was a clever way to expand quickly without needing to govern every village directly. At this stage, the Ottomans were a magnet for talent. Craftsmen, scholars, and soldiers flocked to their banner. They offered stability in a world of chaos. But as they looked across the narrow waters of the Dardanelles, they saw something more. They saw Europe. The crossing into Europe was not a massive invasion at first. It was almost accidental. A series of earthquakes in 1354 destroyed the walls of Gallipoli. The Ottomans simply walked in. It was a strange twist of fate that changed the course of history forever. Suddenly, a power from Anatolia had a permanent foothold on European soil. This was the moment the world began to take notice. The Turkish threat was no longer a distant rumor. It was a reality at the doorstep of the Balkans. But how could a group of horsemen manage a growing empire with different languages and religions? The secret lay in their ability to adapt. Think about the word legacy. A legacy is something handed down from an ancestor or predecessor. Osman left his successors a name and a sword. He also left them a mission: to keep moving, to keep building, and to never settle for what they already had. As we move forward, listen for the term centralization. This means the concentration of control of an activity or organization under a single authority. To survive, the Ottomans had to move from tribal councils to a centralized throne. This shift would create one of the most efficient bureaucracies the world had ever seen. But first, they had to face a city that had stood for 1,000 years, a city of golden domes and massive walls. Constantinople was the ultimate prize. Every Ottoman leader dreamed of it. It was the red apple, the fruit that seemed just out of reach. Why did the Byzantine Empire fail to stop them? Why did the Christian kingdoms of Europe fail to unite? These are the questions we must answer to understand the Ottoman rise. The story is not just about battles. It is about the birth of a new system. In the next part, we will see how the Ottomans moved deep into the Balkans. We will witness the birth of the Janissaries, an elite force that would become both the shield and the shadow of the Sultan. Before we move on, remember the word tenacity. It means the quality of being very determined. The early Ottomans had the tenacity of people who had everything to gain and nothing to lose. They were building an empire, one horse length at a time. But as they grew, the stakes became higher. They would soon encounter an enemy that could match their fury. A man known as the Scourge of God would bring the Ottoman expansion to a crashing halt. Was the empire destined to die before it truly began? The Ottoman banner had crossed the sea, and for the first time, a power from the east was not just raiding Europe, but staying. The year was 1389. On the field of blackbirds in Kosovo, a massive clash took place that still echoes in the songs of the Balkans today. This battle established the Ottomans as the masters of the region. But to maintain this mastery, they needed more than just tribal horsemen. They needed a new kind of machine. This machine was a human one. It was called the Janissaries. In Turkish, the word is Yeniçeri, which literally means new soldier. These men were the first standing army in Europe since the days of Rome. Listen for the word elite. An elite group is a small, highly skilled group that is superior to the rest. The Janissaries were the elite heart of the Ottoman war machine. They were created through a controversial system known as the devshirme. This was a kind of human tax. Young Christian boys from the Balkan villages were taken, converted to Islam, and trained with rigorous discipline. They were the Sultan's personal property, but they were also his most powerful weapon. In historical English, we might describe this as a double-edged sword. This phrase means something that has both favorable and unfavorable consequences. It gave the Sultan a loyal army, but it also created a class of men who would eventually hold the throne itself in their hands. Imagine the life of a young janissary. He was cut off from his family, his past erased. He lived in barracks. He was forbidden to marry or trade. His only family was his regiment, and his only father was the Sultan. This level of devotion is rare. To have devotion means to have great love or loyalty to a person or cause. The janissaries were devoted to the empire, and they became the most feared infantry in the world. But as the empire reached out with one hand, it almost lost its head to another. At the dawn of the 1400s, a new storm arrived from the east. His name was Timur, known to history as Tamerlane. He was a conqueror who claimed the legacy of Genghis Khan. In 1402, at the Battle of Ankara, the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I faced Timur. It was a disaster. The Ottoman army was crushed, and the Sultan himself was captured. One famous account claims that Bayezid was kept in an iron cage, though some historians suggest this was a metaphor for his loss of sovereignty. Sovereignty is a key word for us. It refers to the supreme power or authority of a state to govern itself. For a moment, Ottoman sovereignty vanished. The empire was divided among Bayezid's sons, and a bloody civil war began. This period is known as the interregnum. An interregnum is a period when normal government is suspended, usually between the reign of one ruler and the next. For 11 years, the Ottoman project seemed finished. The neighbors of the Ottomans watched with relief, thinking the Turkish threat had burned out. They were wrong. What saved the empire was its infrastructure. Infrastructure usually refers to physical things like roads or bridges, but here it refers to the administrative system the Ottomans had built. Even without a sultan, the local governors and the Janissary Corps held the pieces together. They had created a state that was stronger than any one man. Finally, Mehmed I emerged victorious from the civil war. He is often called the second founder of the empire. He spent his reign stitching the pieces back together, showing incredible resilience. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. The Ottomans didn't just survive, they learned. They realized that to be a true empire, they could not just be a collection of warlords. They needed a center. They needed a heart. The heart they wanted was Constantinople. For over 1,000 years, this city had been the bastion of the Christian world. A bastion is a person or institution that strongly defends a particular principle or activity. Constantinople was the bastion of the old Roman world, protected by the massive Theodosian walls. These walls were thought to be impregnable. If a place is impregnable, it is unable to be captured or broken into. For centuries, Arab and Turkic armies had broken themselves against these walls. But a new sultan was coming to the throne. His name was Mehmed II, and he was only 21 years old. He was obsessed with the city. He carried maps of its defenses everywhere he went. He studied the science of ballistics, the science of projectiles and firearms. He knew that the age of the horsemen was ending, and the age of the cannon was beginning. To take the city, he would need to do the impossible. He would need to change the rules of war. This brings us to a turning point. A turning point is a time at which a decisive change in a situation occurs, typically one with a beneficial result. The siege of 1453 would not just be a battle. It would be a clash of two eras. On one side, the last of the Romans defending their ancient home. On the other, a young, hungry empire with a new technology that could turn stone into dust. How did he move ships over dry land to bypass the city's defenses? These are the questions we will explore as the walls finally begin to crumble. But before we reach the smoke of the cannons, think about the word ambition. It is a strong desire to do or to achieve something, typically requiring determination and hard work. Mehmed's ambition was so great that it frightened his own advisors. They feared he was leading them to ruin. As we move to the next part, keep the word transformation in mind. The fall of Constantinople would transform a regional kingdom into a world power. It would change the trade routes of the planet and force Europeans to look across the Atlantic Ocean toward a new world. The end of one story was the beginning of everything we know today. The year is 1453. The scent of gunpowder fills the spring air around the city of Constantinople. For weeks, the young Sultan Mehmed II has stared at the massive walls of the city. These walls are monumental. In English, monumental means something great in importance, size, or scale. They had protected the Byzantine Empire for over 1,000 years. But Mehmed had a weapon the world had never seen: the monster cannon. This cannon was designed by an engineer named Urban. It was 27 feet long and could fire a 1,200-pound stone ball. This represents a paradigm shift. The era of medieval walls was ending. The era of artillery had arrived. Artillery refers to large-caliber guns used in warfare on land. Listen to the thunder of these guns. They shook the very foundations of the earth. However, the city was still protected by a massive chain across the water, blocking the entrance to the Golden Horn. Mehmed's fleet could not get through. This was a stalemate. To break it, Mehmed did something legendary. He ordered his men to build a road of greased logs over the hills of Galata. Overnight, 70 Ottoman ships were pulled by oxen and men across the land and dropped into the water behind the enemy's chain. Imagine the consternation of the defenders when they woke up. Their water defenses had been bypassed. The city was now surrounded on all sides. On May 29th, the final assault began. The last Roman emperor, Constantine XI, reportedly threw off his royal purple robes and charged into the fray as a common soldier. He was never seen again. The fall of Constantinople was catastrophic for the Western world. To Europeans, it felt like the end of the world. But for the Ottomans, it was a rebirth. Mehmed did not want to destroy the city. He wanted to restore it. He rode his horse to the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom, and claimed it as a mosque. He then took a new title, Kaiseri Rum, the Caesar of Rome. Mehmed's vision for his empire was not one of forced conversion, but of integration. Integration is the act of combining or adding parts to make a unified whole. This led to the creation of the Millet system. This is a crucial concept for your English vocabulary. A millet was a protected religious community within the empire. Christians and Jews were allowed to govern their own affairs, use their own languages, and practice their own laws, as long as they paid a tax and remained loyal to the Sultan. Think about how progressive this was for the 15th century. While European kingdoms were often persecuting those with different beliefs, the Ottoman Empire was becoming a mosaic. A mosaic is a picture or pattern produced by arranging together small, colored pieces. In this case, the pieces were different cultures and faiths living under one banner. This system allowed the empire to expand rapidly across diverse lands without constant internal rebellion. But this was also the era where the seeds of future nationalism were quietly resting. Nationalism is an extreme form of patriotism, marked by a feeling of superiority over other countries. At this time, people identified by their religion, not their ethnicity. The Greeks, Serbs, and Bulgarians were all Rum, or Romans, in the eyes of the Sultan. This lack of ethnic tension was the bedrock of Ottoman stability for centuries. Bedrock means the fundamental principles on which something is based. As Mehmed rebuilt the city, now called Constantinople, he invited craftsmen and merchants from all over the world to live there. He built the Grand Bazaar, which became the beating heart of global trade. The city was a metropolis once again. A metropolis is a very large and busy city, often the capital of a country or region. It was the gateway between East and West. If you wanted silk from China or spices from India, your goods had to pass through Ottoman hands. This control over trade routes created a monopoly. A monopoly is the exclusive possession or control of the supply of or trade in a commodity or service. This monopoly made the Ottomans incredibly wealthy. But it also had an unintended consequence. An unintended consequence is a result that was not expected or intended. Because the Ottomans controlled the land routes, European explorers like Christopher Columbus began looking for a sea route to Asia. The rise of the Ottomans accidentally triggered the Age of Discovery. By the time Mehmed died, he had laid the foundations of a superpower. He had transformed a group of warriors into a sophisticated state. But the empire was not yet at its peak. It needed a leader who could take it from a regional power to a global hegemon. This leader would be known to his people as the lawgiver, and to the West as the magnificent. Before we meet him, consider the word hegemony. It means leadership or dominance, especially by one country or social group over others. The Ottomans were moving toward global hegemony. They were no longer just a threat. They were the standard by which all other empires were measured. In the next part, we will enter the Golden Age. We will walk through the gardens of the Topkapi Palace and witness the empire at its most beautiful and most terrifying. We will see how one man's law changed the lives of millions across 3 continents. What happens when an empire becomes too big to fail? How do you govern millions of people from a single room in Istanbul? The answers lie in the corridors of power, where the smell of incense masks the whispers of intrigue. Intrigue is the making of secret plans to do something illicit or detrimental to someone else. The Golden Age was glorious, but it was also a gilded cage. While the conquest of Constantinople turned the Ottomans into a world power, it was a ruthless sultan named Suleiman I who turned them into a religious superpower. Known as Suleiman the Grim, he turned his eyes away from Europe and toward the ancient heartlands of the Middle East. In just 2 years, between 1516 and 1517, he defeated the Mamluk Sultanate, doubling the size of the empire. He captured Damascus, Cairo, and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. By taking these cities, Selim claimed the title of Caliph. Listen to the word prestige. Prestige is widespread respect and admiration, felt for someone or something on the basis of their achievements or quality. By becoming the Caliph, the Ottoman Sultan gained the highest religious prestige in the Islamic world. He was no longer just a king of Turks and Greeks. He was the protector of the holy places. This gave the empire a spiritual mandate that would last for 400 years. A mandate is an official order or commission to do something. But the peak of this empire arrived with Selim's son, Suleiman I. In the West, they called him the Magnificent because of the splendor of his court. Splendor refers to magnificent and splendid appearance or grandeur. In the East, he was known as Kanuni, or the lawgiver. This is where we see the Ottoman system reach its most refined state. To be refined means to be developed or improved so as to be precise or elegant. Suleiman did not just want to conquer land, he wanted to organize justice. He realized that an empire spanning 3 continents needed a uniform legal code. Uniform means remaining the same in all cases and at all times. He codified the laws of the empire. To codify means to arrange laws or rules into a systematic code. He balanced the sacred religious law with secular sultanic law, creating a system that protected the rights of peasants against corrupt local officials. Imagine walking through the Topkapi Palace during Suleiman's reign. The silence was profound. Profound means very great or intense. In the inner courts, hundreds of officials moved in total silence to show respect to the Sultan. This was the zenith of Ottoman power. The zenith is the time at which something is most powerful or successful. From his throne in Istanbul, Suleiman could command a fleet in the Indian Ocean and an army at the gates of Vienna. The Siege of Vienna in 1529 is often called the high water mark of the empire. A high water mark is an idiom meaning the maximum point of progress or fortune. Suleiman's army marched through torrential rain to reach the heart of Europe. The defenders of Vienna were stalwart, meaning they were loyal, reliable, and hard-working in their defense. Ultimately, the weather and the long supply lines forced the Ottomans to retreat. They did not take Vienna, but the fear they inspired in Europe was pervasive. Pervasive means spreading widely throughout an area or a group of people. During this golden age, the Ottoman navy, led by admirals like Barbarossa, turned the Mediterranean into an Ottoman lake. This allowed for an incredible explosion of trade and culture. This is the era of Mimar Sinan, the greatest architect of the empire. He built the Süleymaniye Mosque, a structure of such mathematical precision that it has survived centuries of earthquakes. Sinan's work represents the aesthetic of the empire. Aesthetic refers to a set of principles underlying and guiding the work of a particular artist or artistic movement. But beneath this veneer of gold and marble, the seeds of future trouble were being sown. A veneer is an attractive appearance that covers or disguises someone or something's true nature or feelings. To prevent civil wars, the Ottomans had practiced fratricide. This is the killing of one's brother or sister. When a new sultan took the throne, his brothers were often executed to prevent them from starting a rebellion. Suleiman himself had to make agonizing decisions regarding his own sons to ensure the stability of the state. Notice the word succession. Succession is the action or process of inheriting a title, office, or property. The Ottoman rules of succession were brutal but effective until they changed. To avoid the horror of killing princes, the empire began locking them in a special part of the palace called the cage. They lived in luxury, but had no experience in the real world. Think about the implications of this. An implication is the conclusion that can be drawn from something, although it is not explicitly stated. Future sultans would grow up without ever seeing a battlefield or a government meeting. As Suleiman grew old, the empire was at its greatest extent, but it was also becoming stationary. Stationary means not moving or not intended to be moved. The rapid expansion that had fueled the Ottoman economy was slowing down. The empire was transitioning from a predatory state to a bureaucratic one. A bureaucracy is a system of government in which most of the important decisions are made by state officials rather than by elected representatives. How do you keep a giant machine running when the engine starts to cool? Suleiman's death in 1566 was kept a secret for weeks so the army wouldn't panic. His passing marked the end of the heroic age of the sultans. The era of the Grand Viziers was about to begin. These were the prime ministers who would hold the empire together, while the sultans remained behind the palace walls. In the next part, we will explore the slow burn of the Ottoman decline. We will see how a changing world in the West, filled with gold from the Americas and new scientific ideas, began to outpace the traditional ways of the East. The sick man of Europe was not yet ill, but the first symptoms were starting to appear. What happens when an empire stops looking forward and starts looking backward? Why did the once invincible Janissaries become a threat to the very sultans they were supposed to protect? The answers will reveal the fragility of greatness. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had been a growing tide. But in the 17th century, that tide began to recede. We often call this period the era of stagnation. Stagnation is a state in which there is no growth, movement, or development. While Europe was experiencing the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, the Ottomans began to look inward. They were trapped by their own success. The first sign of trouble was the Janissary problem. These elite soldiers, once the Sultan's most loyal tool, had become a political liability. A liability is a person or thing whose presence or behavior is likely to cause embarrassment or put one at a disadvantage. The Janissaries were no longer just soldiers. They were a powerful interest group. They began to demand more pay and less discipline. If a sultan tried to change their rules, they would overturn their massive soup cauldrons in the palace courtyard, a traditional sign of mutiny. Listen for the word mutiny. It is an open rebellion against the proper authorities, especially by soldiers or sailors. Because the Janissaries lived in the capital, they could make or break a sultan. The once mighty emperors were now often puppets of their own guard. A puppet is a person under the control of another. This shift in power made the central government volatile. Volatile means likely to change in a very sudden or extreme way. Outside the palace walls, the world was changing in ways the Ottomans did not yet understand. Spanish silver from the New World was flooding into Europe, causing massive inflation. Inflation is a general increase in prices and a fall in the purchasing value of money. The Ottoman economy, which relied on fixed prices and traditional guilds, could not handle the shock. The currency was devalued. To devalue something means to reduce its worth. This led to social unrest, a term describing a state of dissatisfaction and disturbance in a society. In 1683, the empire made one last grand attempt to expand. They marched on Vienna for a second time. This was the Great Turkish War. For 2 months, the city held its breath. But at the last moment, a massive relief force of Polish cavalry, led by King Jan Sobieski, charged down the hills. The Ottoman lines broke. This defeat was decisive. Decisive means settling an issue and producing a definite result. For the first time, the Ottomans were not just stopped, they were pushed back. In 1699, they signed the Treaty of Karlowitz. This was a humiliation. Humiliation is the action of making someone feel ashamed and foolish by injuring their dignity and self-respect. For the first time in history, the Ottoman Empire ceded large amounts of territory to European powers. To cede means to give up power or territory. The empire was no longer the hunter. It was becoming the hunted. Notice the word obsolescence. It refers to the process of becoming obsolete or outdated. The Ottoman military tactics were becoming obsolete compared to the new tactical developments in Europe. European armies were using faster muskets and more mobile cannons. The Ottomans, proud of their traditions, were slow to adapt. They began to rely on capitulations. These were special trade agreements that gave European merchants huge advantages within the empire. While these capitulations were meant to encourage trade, they became a stranglehold on the Ottoman economy. A stranglehold is a grip around the neck of another person that can kill by stopping the breath. It also means complete control over a situation. European countries could now undermine Ottoman industry by selling cheaper goods in the Sultan's own markets. To undermine means to lessen the effectiveness, power, or ability of someone or something, especially in a secret or gradual way. By the 18th century, a new word entered the diplomatic vocabulary: the Eastern Question. This was the problem of what to do with the Ottoman Empire as it grew weaker. The great powers of Europe, Russia, Britain, and Austria, all wanted a piece of the sick man. They didn't want the empire to collapse too quickly because they feared a massive war over the spoils. Spoils are goods stolen or taken by force. However, a new sultan, Suleiman III, realized that the empire would die without reform. Reform is the improvement or amendment of what is wrong, corrupt, or unsatisfactory. He tried to create a new order army trained in the European style. But the Janissaries would not have it. In 1807, they revolted, deposed Suleiman, and eventually murdered him. It seemed that the empire was doomed to be destroyed by its own protectors. But the seed of reform had been planted. The next sultan, Mahmud II, was more calculating. To be calculating means to act in a way that is planned or intended to achieve a particular result. He knew he could not reform the empire as long as the Janissaries existed. He waited 20 years, slowly building a secret, modern force. In 1826, he finally struck. He turned his cannons on the Janissary barracks in Istanbul and wiped them out. This event is known as the auspicious incident. The word auspicious means conducive to success, favorable. For the Sultan, the destruction of his own army was the only way to save the state. It was a bloody fresh start. But was it too late? While the Sultan was modernizing his army, a new and more dangerous idea was spreading through the Balkans and the Middle East. This idea was nationalism. It was the belief that people who share a language and culture should have their own independent nation. For an empire built on the Millet system, where different groups lived together under the Sultan, nationalism was a poison. The Greeks were the first to strike for independence. The era of the multi-ethnic empire was about to face its greatest existential threat. An existential threat is a threat to the very existence of something. Could the sick man survive the birth of new nations within its own borders? How do you keep an empire together when its people no longer want to be subjects? The struggle for the soul of the empire was just beginning. The Sultan stood in the rose chamber of the Topkapi Palace, holding a piece of paper that would change everything. The year was 1839. This document was the Edict of Gülhane. It launched an era known as the Tanzimat, which means reorganization or reordering. This was the most ambitious period of reform in the history of the empire. The Ottomans realized that to survive in a world of steam engines and modern banks, they had to change their very essence. The Tanzimat was an attempt to modernize everything: the law, the army, and even the way people dressed. The Sultan traded his traditional robes and turban for a European-style suit and a fez. This was not just a fashion choice, it was a symbolic gesture. Symbolic means serving as a visible symbol for something abstract. The Sultan was signaling to the world that the empire was joining the modern age. One of the most revolutionary parts of this reform was the idea of Ottomanism. This was the belief that all subjects of the empire, whether Muslim, Christian, or Jew, should be equal under the law. Listen for the word egalitarian. An egalitarian society is one that believes in the principle that all people are equal and deserve equal rights. This was a massive shift from the old Millet system, where people were defined primarily by their religion. But while the central government tried to build a unified identity, a different force was tearing the edges of the empire apart. This force was nationalism. Nationalism is the desire of a people with a common culture to have their own sovereign state. Sovereign means possessing supreme or ultimate power. In the mountains of the Balkans, this feeling was reaching a boiling point. A boiling point is the stage at which a situation becomes critical or uncontrollable. The Greeks had already won their independence after a long and bloody war. Now, the Serbs and Bulgarians were looking for autonomy. Autonomy is the right or condition of self-government. For centuries, these people had lived as part of the Ottoman mosaic. But now, they saw themselves as separate nations trapped inside an alien empire. The Sultan's reforms were often too little, too late to stop the tide of independence. During this time, the empire became heavily indebted to European banks. To be indebted means to owe money. To pay for modern weapons and grand palaces, the Ottomans borrowed millions from Britain and France. This created a vicious cycle. A vicious cycle is a sequence of reciprocal cause and effect, in which two or more elements intensify and aggravate each other. The more they borrowed, the more leverage European powers had over Ottoman policy. Leverage is the power to influence a person or situation. In the mid-19th century, the empire found itself at the center of a global conflict, the Crimean War. For the first time, Britain and France fought on the side of the Ottomans against Russia. They didn't do this out of love for the Sultan. They did it to maintain the balance of power. This is a diplomatic term for a situation where no single nation is strong enough to dominate the others. The Ottomans prevailed in the war, but at a terrible cost. To prevail means to prove more powerful than opposing forces, to be victorious. The war brought new technologies to Istanbul, like the telegraph and modern nursing. But it also brought a new kind of intellectual rebellion. A group of young writers and officers, known as the Young Ottomans, began to argue that the Sultan's reforms did not go far enough. They wanted a constitutional monarchy. Constitutional means relating to an established set of principles governing a state. They believed that only a parliament could save the state from total disintegration. Disintegration is the process of losing cohesion or strength, coming to pieces. In 1876, after a period of intense political turmoil, the empire finally got its first constitution and its first parliament. Turmoil is a state of great disturbance, confusion, or uncertainty. For a brief moment, it seemed like the Ottoman Empire might become a modern democracy. But the new Sultan, Abdul Hamid II, was a man of a different temperament. Temperament refers to a person's nature, especially as it permanently affects their behavior. Abdul Hamid was suspicious and deeply conservative. Conservative means averse to change or innovation and holding traditional values. When a new war with Russia broke out in 1877, he used the emergency as an excuse to suspend the constitution and close the parliament. He would rule as an absolute monarch for the next 30 years. His reign was a period of contradictions. A contradiction is a combination of statements, ideas, or features of a situation that are opposed to one another. He built thousands of miles of railways and telegraph lines, connecting the distant provinces of the empire. He modernized education, but he also created a massive espionage network. The Sultan's spies were everywhere. People were afraid to speak their minds in the coffee houses of Istanbul. This created an atmosphere of paranoia. Paranoia is a mental condition characterized by delusions of persecution or unwarranted jealousy. While the Sultan was trying to hold the empire together through centralization, the secret societies against him were growing. Think about the word clandestine. It means kept secret or done secretively, especially because illicit. Clandestine groups of army officers began to meet in the shadows of the Balkans. They called themselves the Committee of Union and Progress, but the world would know them as the Young Turks. As the 19th century turned into the 20th, the Ottoman Empire was a powder keg. A powder keg is a metaphor for a situation that is very dangerous and could explode at any moment. The great powers of Europe were waiting for the explosion so they could partition the remains. To partition means to divide into parts. What happens when a group of young, angry officers takes control of an aging empire? Can they modernize fast enough to stop the imperialist ambitions of Europe? The answer would be found in the smoke and blood of a world-shattering conflict. The year 1908 brought a sound to the streets of Istanbul that had not been heard in decades. The sound of people cheering for liberty. In the mountains of Macedonia, young army officers had finally reached their breaking point. A breaking point is the moment of greatest strain at which someone or something gives way. These officers, members of the Committee of Union and Progress, demanded the return of the Constitution. Sultan Abdul Hamid II, seeing the inevitable, surrendered his absolute power. This was the Young Turk Revolution. For a few brief months, the empire experienced a euphoria. Euphoria is a feeling or state of intense excitement and happiness. In the marketplaces, Turks, Greeks, Armenians, and Arabs embraced. They believed that a new era of brotherhood had begun. Listen for the phrase, the dawn of a new day. It is often used to describe a hopeful beginning after a period of darkness. But this dawn was short-lived. If something is short-lived, it lasts only a short time. The revolution faced an immediate backlash. A backlash is a strong and adverse reaction by a large number of people, especially to a social or political development. In 1909, conservative groups attempted a counter-coup to restore the Sultan's religious authority. The Young Turks suppressed the rebellion with military force. To suppress means to forcibly put an end to something. They then deposed Abdul Hamid, sending him into exile. The old guard was gone, but the new guard was about to face a nightmare. Notice how the word nationalism now begins to change its shape. Before, it was a force used by minorities to break away from the empire. Now, a new kind of Turkish nationalism began to grow within the heart of the government itself. Some leaders began to move away from the inclusive idea of Ottomanism. They started to emphasize Turkic identity above all else. This shift created friction with the Arab and Christian populations. Friction refers to conflict or animosity caused by a clash of wills or temperaments. While the empire was fighting itself internally, its neighbors saw an opportunity to strike. The empire was vulnerable. To be vulnerable means to be exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed. In 1911, Italy invaded Ottoman Libya. Then, in 1912, a coalition of Balkan states, Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, and Serbia, declared war. The Balkan Wars were a cataclysm for the Ottoman state. A cataclysm is a large-scale and violent event in the natural world, or a sudden political or social upheaval. In a matter of weeks, the Ottomans lost almost all of their remaining European territories. The city of Edirne, a former capital, fell. Millions of Muslim refugees, known as muhajir, fled the violence, pouring into Istanbul with stories of horror, These refugees brought a deep sense of trauma to the heart of the empire. This loss of land changed the demographics of the empire. Demographics are the statistical data relating to the population and particular groups within it. The empire was now smaller, poorer, and more homogeneous. Homogeneous means consisting of parts all of the same kind. With the loss of the Balkan Christians, the empire became more overwhelmingly Muslim. This accelerated the rise of radical nationalism among the ruling Young Turks. By 1913, a triumvirate of 3 men took total control of the government. They were Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Kemal Pasha. They were known as the 3 Pashas. They believed that only a drastic move could save the empire from total collapse. Drastic means likely to have a strong or far-reaching effect. Extreme. We began to look for a powerful ally in Europe to help them regain their lost prestige. They turned to Germany. The German Empire had invested heavily in the Ottomans, building the Berlin to Baghdad railway. To the 3 Pashas, Germany represented modernity and military strength. In August 1914, as Europe descended into the madness of World War I, the Ottomans signed a secret alliance with Berlin. The decision to enter the war was fateful. Fateful means having far-reaching and typically disastrous consequences or implications. Many in the Ottoman cabinet wanted to remain neutral. To be neutral means not helping or supporting either side in a conflict or disagreement. But Enver Pasha, the most ambitious of the 3, forced the empire's hand. He allowed German warships flying the Ottoman flag to bombard Russian ports in the Black Sea. The die was cast. This idiom means that an event has happened, or a decision has been made that cannot be changed. The Ottoman Empire was now at war with the 3 greatest powers on earth: Britain, France, and Russia. This was a gamble of epic proportions. A gamble is a risky action in the hope of a desired result. The leaders hoped that a quick victory would allow them to reclaim their lost lands in the Balkans and the Caucasus. Instead, they had walked into a meat grinder. This is a graphic idiom used to describe a battle or war where soldiers are killed in huge numbers, with no clear result. The empire was forced to fight on multiple fronts at once. A front is the furthest position that an army has reached and where the fighting is taking place. From the frozen mountains of Sarikamish to the burning sands of the Sinai, Ottoman soldiers were pushed to the limit of human endurance. Endurance is the fact or power of enduring an unpleasant or difficult process or situation without giving way. In this climate of total war and fear, the bonds that had held the multi-ethnic empire together for 6 centuries began to snap. Suspicion replaced coexistence, the state of living in the same place or time. Fear grew, shattering unity. The government's fear of internal subversion led to some of the darkest chapters in human history. Subversion is the undermining of the power and authority of an established system or institution as the war progressed. The very fabric of the empire began to unravel, a metaphor for society's essential structure. While soldiers fought in trenches, civilians faced starvation and displacement, forced to leave their homes. How did a crumbling empire manage to win one of the greatest defensive victories in history at Gallipoli? And why, despite such victories, did the empire eventually implode? To implode means to collapse violently inward. The Great War would be the funeral of the Ottoman world. But from its ashes, something entirely new would be born. In the next part, we will witness the agony of the final years, collapse of fronts, secret treaties, rise of a soldier. The map was about to be rewritten, and the consequences would last for a century. The Ottoman Empire entered WWI as the sick man of Europe, but at Gallipoli, it fought with the ferocity of a tiger. In 1915, the British and French launched a massive naval and land assault to capture Istanbul. They expected an easy victory against a decaying power. Instead, they met a wall of fire and unyielding courage. High on the cliffs of the peninsula, a young colonel named Mustafa Kemal gave an order that would become legendary. He told his men, "I do not order you to fight, I order you to die." Reinforcements were moving up. This was a war of attrition, gradually reducing strength through sustained attack and relentless pressure. Listen for logistics, the detailed coordination of complex operations involving people, facilities, and crucial supplies. British logistics were a disaster. Ottomans, fighting for their homeland, used rough terrain to their advantage. For 8 months, a bloody stalemate ensued. When allies withdrew, the Ottoman victory was unprecedented. It was immense national pride, but a Pyrrhic victory, one at too great a cost to be worthwhile. While Gallipoli was a win, the empire hemorrhaged on other fronts, losing great amounts rapidly. In the Caucasus Mountains, Enver Pasha led an army into a winter catastrophe at Sarıkamış. Thousands of soldiers froze to death without firing a shot. Defeat fueled paranoia. Government suspected Armenian population near Russian border were acting as a fifth column. This led to one of the darkest and most contentious chapters of the Ottoman story. In 1915, mass deportation of Armenians from eastern Anatolia. Hundreds of thousands died from starvation, disease, violence. Historians debate intent and scale, but for victims, it was an unspeakable tragedy, beyond words. The old Millet system, allowing faiths to coexist for centuries, disintegrated under modern nationalism. As the war dragged on, a new threat emerged from the south. The Arab provinces began to restless. In 1916, Sharif of Mecca launched the Arab Revolt, encouraged by British agents like T.E. Lawrence. The British promised the Arabs an independent kingdom in exchange for their help against the Sultan. This was a bitter blow to Ottoman Islamic leadership. The Sultan had declared a jihad. Many Arab tribes chose nationalism over religious loyalty. The empire now fought a civil war and a world war. Ottoman infrastructure failed. Trains stopped, no coal. Istanbul people stood in bread lines. By 1918, the Ottoman army was spent. The final blow came at the Battle of Megiddo in Palestine. Ottoman lines collapsed. British cavalry swept into Damascus. The three pashas realized the end had come. They fled the country on a German boat under cover of darkness, doing something secretly at night. On October 30th, 1918, Ottoman officials signed the Armistice of Mudros on a British battleship's deck. More than a truce, it was a capitulation. The empire was disarmed, ports and railways occupied. Its capital, Istanbul, saw British and French warships anchored in the Golden Horn. Imagine the despair of Turkish people. Their empire, reaching Vienna's gates, now partitioned like a cake. Under Sykes-Picot Agreement, Britain and France drew lines on a map, deciding Middle East partitions. These arbitrary lines, based on whim, ignored ethnic and religious realities of the Middle Eastern people. The Sultan, a shadow of his former self, remained in his palace but had no real authority. Allies intended to leave Turks only a small piece of central Anatolia. The Ottoman story seemed over. The legacy of 600 years was about to vanish into the pages of history. As foreign generals celebrated in Istanbul hotels, a resistance was forming in the country's heart. Ordinary people, farmers, teachers, soldiers, refused their nation's death warrant, looking for a leader. They sought the hero of Gallipoli, embodying defiance, a proud resistance to opposing forces. The next years, a struggle for survival, a war of independence to destroy old empire, forge new republic. When a people lose everything but identity, how did a defeated army turn back multiple invasions? Sultanate's end was near. A modern state's birth began. Transition from empire to republic, a path of fire. Imagine Istanbul in 1919, a city of ghosts. First time since 1453, foreign warships anchored in Golden Horn. British, French, Italian soldiers walk Istanbul streets. Sultan Mehmed VI, in his palace, is a prisoner. The great powers are preparing to carve up the Anatolian heartland. This was the moment of ultimate crisis. In May 1919, a Greek army landed in Izmir, sending a shockwave through the Turkish population. People realized not just an empire's end, but a threat to their very existence as a people. Sultan's government chose submission, but a different path was forged in the interior mountains. Mustafa Kemal, the hero of Gallipoli, left Istanbul on a small, leaking steamer named the Bandırma. He was officially sent to supervise the demobilization of Ottoman troops. But Kemal had a secret agenda. His plan? Ignite nationalism to consume old Ottoman identity, creating something entirely new. Listen for sovereignty, a state's supreme power or authority to govern itself, a fundamental political concept. Kemal declared, "Sovereignty belongs unconditionally to the nation," a heresy to those believing power from Sultan. Kemal was shifting the source of power from the palace to the people. In April 1920, the Grand National Assembly opened in Ankara, a small, dusty town in the middle of Anatolia. This became the provisional government's heart. Sultan in Istanbul signed Treaty of Sèvres, leaving Turks almost nothing. The provisional government in Ankara tore the treaty to pieces. They chose defiance over death. The Turkish War of Independence was brutal. Nationalists fought Greeks, Armenians, and French for 3 years. They even fought the Army of the Caliphate, loyalist troops sent by the Sultan to stop rebels. This fratricidal conflict, a battle within one family, fought for the very soul of the nation. Notice the word mobilization. This is the act of a country and its government preparing and organizing troops for active service. Kemal mobilized every man, woman, and child. Women carried artillery shells on their backs over snowy mountains. This was total war. A total war is a conflict in which a nation as a whole is mobilized, and the distinction between soldiers and civilians is blurred. The tenacity of these people changed the course of history. In 1922, the nationalist forces launched a decisive offensive. They drove the Greek armies back to the sea. When the dust settled, the Allies realized they could no longer ignore the will of the Turkish people. They were forced to negotiate a new peace treaty. But before Kemal went to the peace table, he had to settle a final account with the past. To settle an account is an idiom meaning to deal with a past grievance or debt. On November 1st, 1922, the Grand National Assembly voted to abolish the Ottoman Sultanate. To abolish means to formally put an end to a system, practice, or institution. The last Sultan, Mehmed VI, fled the city on a British warship. He left behind a palace of empty rooms and a history of 6 centuries. The empire was officially dead. The word empire, which had once meant glory and diversity, was now replaced by the word republic. A republic is a state in which supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives. The Treaty of Lausanne, signed in 1923, recognized the independence and borders of the new Republic of Turkey. It was a triumph for Kemal and his followers, but the most difficult part was yet to come. Kemal, who would later take the name Ataturk, or Father of the Turks, wanted to launch a series of radical reforms. Radical means relating to or affecting the fundamental nature of something, far-reaching or thorough. These reforms were designed to turn a traditional religious society into a secular and modern one. Listen to the word secular. It means not connected with religious or spiritual matters. Ataturk abolished the caliphate, the religious office that had existed since the time of the Prophet's successors. He changed the alphabet from Arabic to Latin. He gave women the right to vote. He even changed the way people wore their clothes. Imagine the disorientation of a person living through this. Disorientation is a state of confusion about one's surroundings or identity. In a few years, their language, their law, and their leaders had all changed. The Ottoman heritage was being erased in favor of a new Turkish identity. To erase means to rub out or remove. This was a top-down revolution, led by a charismatic leader who believed that progress was the only way to survive. But as the new republic rose from the ashes, what happened to the rest of the old empire? What happened to the Arabs, the Kurds, and the people of the Balkans? The collapse of the Ottoman state left a vacuum of power that has not been filled to this day. A vacuum is a space entirely devoid of matter. In politics, it means a lack of authority. The ghosts of the empire did not vanish. They moved into the borders of the new states created by the great powers. They lived in the memories of the families who were forced to move in the population exchanges. They lived in the architecture of the cities from Baghdad to Belgrade. In our final part, we will explore the aftermath of this great collapse. We will see how the Ottoman legacy continues to influence the politics and conflicts of the modern world. Why does the memory of the empire still evoke such passion and controversy? The gritty chronicles of the Ottomans may have ended in 1922, but the echoes are still growing louder. Look at a map of the modern world. Trace the borders of the Middle East, the Balkans, and North Africa. These lines often look straight, as if drawn with a ruler in a quiet room, far away from the land itself. In many ways, they were. These are the scars of the Ottoman collapse. When the empire finally vanished in 1922, it left behind a world that was suddenly unmoored. Unmoored means to be released from moorings or anchors. For 600 years, the Ottoman house had been the anchor for millions. Now, that anchor was gone. This brings us to the concept of legacy. A legacy is something handed down from the past. The Ottoman legacy is not just found in the dusty archives of Istanbul. It is alive in the streets of Sarajevo, the markets of Cairo, and the mosques of Damascus. Listen for the word resonates. To resonate means to evoke images, memories, or emotions. The Ottoman past still resonates in the geopolitics of today. Geopolitics refers to the study of how geography and economics influence international politics. Think about the fragmentation of the region. Fragmentation is the process of breaking into small or separate parts. When the empire fell, it was replaced by dozens of new countries. This was the triumph of nationalism. In this documentary, we have seen how nationalism acted as a hammer, breaking the mosaic of the empire into individual stones. But this fragmentation created a problem. The people were still mixed together, but the borders were not. This has led to a century of conflict and displacement. In the Balkans, the Ottoman past is often viewed through the lens of nostalgia or resentment. Nostalgia is a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past. Resentment is bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly. For some, the Ottoman era was a time of coexistence and peace. For others, it was the Turkish yoke, a period of foreign occupation. This dual perspective is a key part of the region's identity. A dual perspective means seeing something from two different, often opposing points of view. Notice the word influence. Even though the empire is gone, Turkey's modern reform movement and its historical ties give it a unique role in the world. Some call this neo-Ottomanism. This is the idea that modern Turkey should embrace its imperial heritage to exert influence in its old territories. Whether this is a stabilizing force or a disruptive one is a topic of intense debate among historians and politicians today. Stabilizing means making something unlikely to change or fail, while disruptive means causing trouble or lack of order. As we look back on this 60-minute journey, we see a cycle of ascendance, glory, stagnation, and collapse. This is the rhythm of history. The Ottoman story teaches us that no empire is eternal, no matter how monumental its walls. It teaches us that reform is often a race against time. And most importantly, it teaches us that nationalism is a force that can build a nation, but also destroy a home. Listen to the phrase, "the weight of history." We use this to describe how past events continue to affect the present. The Middle East and the Balkans still carry the weight of the Ottoman collapse. The borders drawn in 1920 are still being contested. The identities formed in the Millet system are still clashing with modern secular laws. To understand the headlines of today, you must understand the gritty chronicles of yesterday. Before we conclude, let's reflect on a final word. Reconciliation. Reconciliation is the restoration of friendly relations. For the many nations that once lived under the Ottoman banner, the path to the future requires a reconciliation with the past. It means acknowledging both the splendor and the suffering of those 6 centuries. The Ottoman Empire was more than just a list of sultans and battles. It was a human experiment in how to rule a diverse world. It was a bridge between the East and the West that stood for longer than the United States has been a country. When it fell, the bridge didn't just disappear. It shattered. We are still living among the pieces. Thank you for joining this deep dive into history. You have learned about the Ghazi warriors, the elite janissaries, the magnificent lawgivers, and the radical reformers. You have seen how a tiny beylik in Anatolia became the protector of the holy places. You have witnessed the implosion of a superpower. Keep these words in your vocabulary: legacy, nationalism, and reform. Use them to describe the world around you. History is not a dead subject. It is the foundation of your language and your understanding. The Ottoman story is over, but the memories remain, etched into the stones of the cities and the hearts of the people.